The architecture of financial discipline. There is a quiet exhaustion that many responsible adults carry. Though it is rarely spoken about openly, it is not always the exhaustion of working hard, nor is it simply the fatigue of meeting life's daily demands. It is the deeper tiredness that comes from earning, yet never quite feeling ahead, from watching money arrive and then watching it leave just as steadily, from promising yourself that next month will feel more organized, that next year will feel more secure, that eventually things will settle, and yet for many, that sense of financial steadiness remains strangely elusive, not because they are careless, not because they lack intelligence, but because financial stability is rarely the automatic result of effort alone. Hard work can generate income, but only discipline builds structure, and structure is what turns income into security. If you observe carefully, you will notice that financial lives rarely collapse overnight. Far more often they drift. A subscription here, an impulse there, a commitment accepted without much reflection, a raise absorbed almost immediately into a higher cost of living. None of these decisions appear dramatic in isolation, yet over time, they begin quietly organizing the architecture of a life. For whether we intend it or not, every repeated financial behavior lays another beam, another column, another invisible support into the structure we will one day stand upon. Some structures grow strong enough to support freedom, others require constant maintenance just to remain upright. And what determines the difference is rarely luck. It is discipline. Now, discipline is a word that is often misunderstood. For some, it evokes images of restriction, a life narrowed by constant self-denial. But true financial discipline does not shrink your life. It stabilizes it. It is what allows you to meet the unexpected without immediate panic, to make decisions without the quiet pressure of fragility, to look toward the future with something steadier than hope. Because hope, while comforting, is not a financial strategy. Structure is. There is also a profound psychological shift that occurs when discipline takes root, a shift many people do not anticipate. Money stops feeling chaotic. Decisions grow clearer. Sleep becomes less interrupted by silent calculations about what might go wrong. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, life begins to feel less reactive and more directed. It is important to understand that disciplined people are not necessarily more intelligent than others, nor are they immune to temptation, uncertainty, or error. What distinguishes them is something quieter. They design their behavior in ways that protect their future, not perfectly, but consistently. Over time, this consistency produces a form of confidence that cannot be purchased, the confidence of knowing that your life is becoming structurally stronger. And perhaps the most reassuring truth of all is this: financial discipline is not a personality trait reserved for a fortunate few. It is a set of behaviors, and behaviors can be learned. They can be practiced. They can become natural, often far sooner than people imagine, once clarity replaces guesswork. This audiobook is not about extreme frugality. It is not about chasing complex strategies, and it is certainly not about turning your life into a rigid financial exercise. Instead, it is about understanding the practical architecture that allows ordinary incomes to produce extraordinary stability. Together, we will explore the rules that quietly guide disciplined financial lives, how they organize money, how they prevent small leaks from becoming structural damage, how they build margin, protect what they construct, and think far enough ahead that the future becomes less intimidating. You may recognize some of your current habits along the way. You may discover adjustments that feel immediately relieving. Most importantly, you may begin to see that financial calm is not accidental. It is designed. So wherever you stand today, whether rebuilding, refining, or simply seeking greater clarity, allow this to be the moment you stop hoping your finances will somehow organize themselves and begin understanding how to architect them with intention. Because a disciplined financial life does not feel restrictive. It feels increasingly free. And it begins with a single realization: discipline is not the punishment for wanting a better future. It is the structure that makes that future possible. Chapter 1. Discipline is freedom, not restriction. Few words in financial life carry more misunderstanding than the word discipline. For some, it suggests limitation, a narrowing of choices, a life constrained by constant restraint. It can evoke images of saying no repeatedly, of postponing enjoyment, of living cautiously while others appear to move more freely. Seen from this angle, discipline feels like a sacrifice. But what if this understanding is incomplete? What if discipline, properly understood, is not the removal of freedom, but the creation of it? To see this more clearly, consider the difference between two financial lives. One is organized. Obligations are known. Spending follows intention. Margin exists. Unexpected events, while never convenient, do not immediately destabilize the entire structure. The other life is less ordered. Income arrives and disperses quickly. Commitments accumulate without careful design. Small surprises trigger large stress. Decisions are often made under pressure rather than from clarity. From the outside, both individuals may appear equally free. Both earn, spend, and participate in the rhythms of modern life. Yet internally, their experiences are vastly different. One moves with a quiet sense of authorship. The other moves with a persistent undercurrent of uncertainty. And what separates them is rarely income alone. It is structure. Discipline, at its essence, is the behavior that creates structure. Structure reduces chaos. And wherever chaos recedes, freedom quietly expands. This is one of the great financial paradoxes. The person who places thoughtful boundaries around their money often experiences more ease than the one who avoids boundaries altogether. Because absence of structure does not produce freedom, it produces unpredictability. And unpredictability is expensive, both financially and emotionally. When money feels disorganized, the mind rarely rests completely. Even during calm periods, there is often a subtle vigilance, a background scanning for what might go wrong, what might have been overlooked, what might demand attention next. Over time, this low-grade tension can become so familiar that it is mistaken for normal, but it is not the only way to live. Financial discipline replaces this uncertainty with something far steadier: predictability. When you know where your resources are directed, when obligations are chosen rather than drifted into, when a portion of today is consistently reserved for tomorrow, the nervous system responds. Breathing deepens. Decisions slow down. The future feels less like a looming question mark and more like a landscape gradually coming into view. It is important to recognize that discipline does not demand severity. It is not about stripping life down to its barest form, nor about rejecting comfort or pleasure. Rather, it asks a quieter question. Is my current behavior supporting the life I am trying to build? Sometimes the answer will invite restraint. Other times it will fully support enjoyment, because enjoyment, when resting on stable ground, carries no hidden strain. In this way, discipline becomes less about denial and more about alignment. You are not saying no to life. You are saying yes to a version of life that remains sustainable. There is also a profound shift in self-trust that emerges from disciplined behavior. Each time you follow through on a thoughtful financial intention, however modest, you send yourself a powerful signal. I can rely on my own decisions. Self-trust is rarely discussed in financial education, yet it may be one of the most stabilizing assets a person can possess. Without it, even strong incomes can feel fragile. With it, progress acquires a quiet momentum. And like most meaningful capacities, discipline strengthens through repetition rather than intensity. You do not need dramatic gestures. You need consistency. A small behavior sustained for years will outperform an ambitious plan abandoned after months. This is why disciplined individuals often appear calm during moments that unsettle others. Their stability is not accidental. It has been rehearsed through hundreds of ordinary decisions long before any test arrived. Another misunderstanding worth releasing is the belief that discipline eliminates spontaneity. In truth, it enables it. When your financial foundation is strong, you can act unexpectedly when opportunity appears. You can help when someone you love is in need. You can step toward experiences without quietly calculating their consequences. Spontaneity, when supported by structure, becomes joyful rather than destabilizing. Without structure, it often becomes a source of regret. Perhaps the most liberating realization is this: discipline is a form of self-respect expressed through behavior. It is the quiet declaration that your future deserves preparation, that your efforts deserve protection, that your life is worthy of stability. And importantly, it is never too early nor too late to begin. Discipline does not require that everything be reorganized overnight. It begins wherever you are, with the next thoughtful decision. Over time, these decisions accumulate into something unmistakable, a life less governed by financial surprise, less shaped by urgency, and increasingly capable of supporting the person you are becoming. Yet for discipline to fully translate into stability, it must be directed intentionally. Good intentions alone are rarely sufficient, because money left without guidance tends to follow the path of least resistance. Which brings us to one of the most foundational behaviors in disciplined financial architecture, a principle so simple that it is often underestimated, and so powerful that when practiced consistently, it can alter the trajectory of an entire lifetime. Pay yourself first. Chapter 2. Pay yourself first. The Builder's Prime Law. There is a pattern so common in financial life that many people follow it for years without ever pausing to question it. Income arrives. Obligations are met. Daily life unfolds. And if anything remains at the end of the month, it is saved. At first glance, this sequence appears responsible. After all, commitments must be honored and life must be lived. Yet there is a quiet flaw hidden within this order, one that keeps countless hard-working individuals locked in a cycle of financial postponement. Because when saving depends on what is left over, there is rarely much left. Modern life is remarkably efficient at absorbing available resources. Expenses expand subtly. Needs present themselves convincingly. Small comforts feel justified after demanding weeks. Unexpected costs arrive without invitation. And so the intention to save is carried forward, month after month, year after year, waiting patiently for a season when surplus finally appears. For many, that season never quite arrives. Financially disciplined individuals reverse this sequence entirely. Before life expands to meet their income, they direct a portion of that income toward their future. This is the principle known as paying yourself first. It is not merely a budgeting technique. It is a declaration of priority, a quiet but powerful message that says, "My future is not an afterthought." It participates immediately in the rewards of my effort. What makes this principle so effective is not complexity, but consistency. You are not waiting for ideal conditions. You are establishing a default flow, one that steadily converts earnings into growing stability. Importantly, the amount matters far less than the behavior. Many people delay beginning because they believe the starting figure must be substantial to count. But wealth rarely recognizes dramatic beginnings. It responds to continuity. A modest percentage sustained over time will outperform ambitious contributions that appear briefly and disappear just as quickly. This is why starting small is not a weakness. It is often the beginning of permanence. There is also a profound psychological shift that accompanies this habit. Each time you direct money toward your future before the present lays claim to it, you reinforce an internal identity, the identity of someone who builds rather than merely manages. Over time, this identity reduces friction. Saving no longer feels like an act of resistance. It becomes the natural opening movement in your financial rhythm. One of the most effective ways to protect this rhythm is through automation. Automation removes the need for repeated decision-making. Instead of relying on future motivation, which can fluctuate with mood, energy, and circumstance, you design a system that acts on your behalf. Money flows where it has been instructed to go. Quietly, reliably, almost effortlessly. This is an important principle worth remembering. Do not rely on willpower when systems are available. Willpower is admirable, but finite. Systems endure. Once automated, the act of saving fades into the background of daily life. You adapt to living on what remains, often more comfortably than you expected. Human beings are remarkably capable of adjusting their spending to match the boundaries they establish, and as months pass, something encouraging begins to happen. What once felt like a constraint starts to feel like protection. You look at what has accumulated, perhaps slowly at first, and realize that the future is no longer an abstract concept. It is taking form, quietly supported by decisions your past self had the wisdom to initiate. It is also important to guard this growing reserve thoughtfully. There will be moments when dipping into it seems harmless, a temporary bridge, a convenient solution, a reward after effort. Occasionally, such use may be warranted, but habitual erosion transforms protection back into vulnerability. Treat what you are building with a certain reverence. After all, it represents stored effort, hours of your life preserved for future stability. Another subtle benefit of paying yourself first is the way it reshapes financial perception. Rather than asking, "Can I afford this with everything I earn?" you begin asking a more grounded question. Can I afford this with what remains after honoring my future? That single reframing prevents countless decisions from quietly undermining long-term security. Over time, this behavior creates momentum. Savings become investment capital. Investment capital begins, however gradually, to generate returns, and those returns, given patience, contribute their own quiet energy to the structure you are building. None of this requires financial genius. It requires only the willingness to begin, and the discipline to continue. Perhaps the most reassuring truth is that it is never too late to adopt this principle. Whether early in your earning life or well into it, the moment you redirect the flow is the moment your financial architecture begins strengthening. Not dramatically, but decisively. Because every disciplined structure rests on a simple reality. What is prioritized grows, and when your future is consistently prioritized, stability stops feeling like a distant aspiration and starts becoming your lived experience. Yet for this growing stability to fully support you, another clarity must soon follow, one that reduces confusion, lowers anxiety, and allows you to see your financial life with far greater precision. For money, when blended together without distinction, can create a surprising amount of psychological strain. Builders learn to organize their resources differently. They separate what sustains today from what protects tomorrow. Chapter 3. Separate survival money from future money. One of the most common sources of financial stress is not always how much money a person earns, but how unclear that money feels once it arrives. When all financial resources sit together, unstructured, undifferentiated, every decision begins to carry subtle tension. Spend, and a quiet question emerges. Am I using money I might soon need? Save, and another question follows. Will I have enough available if something unexpected happens? Invest, and uncertainty whispers. What if I must pull this back too soon? This internal friction is rarely dramatic, yet over time it becomes mentally fatiguing. It keeps the nervous system slightly alert, slightly cautious, never fully at ease. But much of this strain does not come from scarcity. It comes from lack of clarity. Financially disciplined individuals often discover a simple yet transformative practice. They give their money distinct roles. Instead of viewing their resources as one large pool, they begin organizing them into clearly defined zones, each serving a different purpose within the architecture of their life. The first is living money. This is the portion designed to support your present housing, food, transportation, daily experiences, the ordinary rhythms that make life functional and meaningful. Living money is meant to move. There is no virtue in depriving this category unnecessarily. Life is happening now, and it deserves thoughtful participation. The second zone is safety money. This is not intended for routine spending, nor for long-term growth. Its role is protection, a buffer between you and the unpredictable moments that visit every life sooner or later. A medical need, a sudden repair, an unexpected transition. Without safety reserves, such events often trigger financial disruption. With them, they become challenges rather than crises. Safety money does something profound beyond its numerical value. It allows the mind to relax. The future feels less threatening when you know you are not entirely exposed to it. The third zone is future money. This is where long-term construction quietly takes place. Funds preserved not for immediate comfort, but for expansion, autonomy, and stability in the years ahead. Future money should be treated with patience. Its power lies in remaining largely untouched, allowed to accumulate and compound without frequent interruption. When these zones are clearly separated, something remarkable happens. Decision-making simplifies. You no longer wonder whether an expense is invading your future because your future has already been given its protected space. You no longer hesitate to invest appropriately because your safety reserve stands between you and premature withdrawal. Clarity replaces internal negotiation, and where clarity grows, fear tends to recede. It is worth emphasizing that this structure is not about rigidity. Money can move between categories when genuinely necessary. Life is dynamic, and flexibility is part of resilience. But movement becomes intentional rather than accidental. You are choosing, not drifting. Another quiet advantage of separation is emotional. When future money is blended with everyday funds, market fluctuations or temporary declines can feel personally destabilizing because the boundary between today and tomorrow is blurred. When properly separated, you gain perspective. Short-term variation is less alarming when you know it does not threaten your immediate stability. This perspective supports better decisions. Calmer, less reactive, more aligned with the long horizon. Many people postpone creating this structure because they imagine it requires complex systems or large sums. It does not. Clarity is not a function of wealth. It is a function of organization. Even modest resources, when clearly directed, produce a sense of control far greater than larger amounts left undefined. And control, in financial life, is deeply reassuring. You begin to feel less like someone hoping things will work out, and more like someone quietly guiding the outcome. Perhaps most importantly, this separation honors a powerful truth. Your present deserves support. Your future deserves protection. And neither should have to compete unnecessarily with the other. Once this architecture is in place, discipline becomes easier to sustain, because you are no longer relying solely on restraint. You are relying on design. Yet even with thoughtful separation, another element determines how resilient your structure ultimately becomes, an element often overlooked during favorable seasons, yet deeply appreciated when life turns unexpectedly. It is the space between what you earn and what you commit. The cushion between obligation and capacity. The quiet distance that transforms pressure into possibility. Margin. Chapter 4. Build the margin that protects your life. There is a condition so common in modern financial life that many people no longer recognize it as a condition at all. It is the experience of living with very little room for error. Income arrives and is quickly assigned. Bills await and must be honored. Commitments line up and depend on consistency. From the outside, such a life may appear stable, responsibilities are being met, progress may even be visible, yet beneath the surface, there often exists a quiet fragility, the awareness that even a small disruption could ripple quickly through the entire structure. This is what life feels like without margin. Margin is the space between what you earn and what you are obligated to spend. It is not excess in the indulgent sense. It is breathing room, and breathing room changes everything. When margin is present, the unexpected loses much of its power to destabilize. An unplanned expense becomes an inconvenience rather than a crisis. A transition becomes navigable rather than frightening. Without margin, however, even minor surprises can trigger outsized stress, not because the situation itself is catastrophic, but because there is no cushion to absorb the impact. In this way, margin acts as a form of financial shock absorption. Much like the suspension system of a well-engineered vehicle, it softens the bumps that inevitably appear along any long road. It is important to understand that margin is not reserved for high earners. Many individuals with substantial incomes live without it. Their financial lives stretch tightly across expanding commitments. And conversely, there are those with moderate earnings who experience remarkable steadiness, not because they possess more, but because they have preserved space. Space to think, space to adjust, space to breathe. One of the quiet dangers of a marginless life is the psychological posture it creates. Decisions begin to feel pressured. Opportunities must be evaluated primarily through the lens of immediate affordability. Even promising possibilities may be declined simply because there is no flexibility to accommodate them. Over time, this constant calculation can become exhausting, but when margin exists, decision-making changes. You are no longer operating exclusively in reaction mode. Instead, you gain the ability to respond thoughtfully, a subtle yet profound upgrade. There is also a deeper emotional shift that accompanies margin. The nervous system begins to settle. The background hum of financial vigilance softens. Sleep becomes less interrupted by silent contingency planning. You move through the world with a growing sense that while you cannot predict every challenge, you are better prepared to meet them. So how is margin built? Rarely through dramatic gestures. More often through small, consistent refusals to allow lifestyle to expand unchecked. Each time income rises, there is a quiet fork in the road. One path leads toward immediate enlargement, more commitments, higher fixed costs, a broader baseline that soon feels ordinary. The other path allows a portion of that increase to remain uncommitted, strengthening the structure instead of stretching it. Financially disciplined individuals do not necessarily avoid upgrading their lives. Rather, they upgrade thoughtfully, ensuring that foundation grows first, or at least grows alongside expansion. This is a principle worth holding close. Let your foundation expand before your lifestyle does. Because a wide lifestyle resting on a narrow base demands constant balance. A wide base, by contrast, supports life with far less strain. Another helpful perspective is to treat fixed expenses with particular care. While discretionary spending can often be adjusted, fixed obligations tend to persist. Each new recurring commitment is not merely a present choice, it is a promise your future self must continue fulfilling. Before accepting such promises, disciplined builders pause long enough to ask, will this obligation make my life sturdier or tighter? There is wisdom in allowing some space to remain intentionally unused. To the untrained eye, unused capacity can look inefficient, money not maximized, potential not fully leveraged, but resilience often appears inefficient until the moment proves otherwise. Perhaps the most liberating realization is this: margin is not about having more than you need. It is about needing less than you have. That distinction grants a quiet independence from constant financial pressure. It allows you to make choices aligned with values rather than dictated by necessity alone. Over time, margin does more than protect. It expands possibility. It creates the conditions in which thoughtful risks can be taken, transitions can be navigated, and opportunities can be welcomed rather than feared. In many ways, margin is what transforms effort into security. Without it, even impressive earnings can feel precarious. With it, stability begins to feel natural. Yet even as margin strengthens your architecture, another subtle threat can undermine progress, not dramatically, but persistently. Small financial leaks, often unnoticed, rarely questioned, but surprisingly capable of draining the very space you worked so carefully to create. Chapter 5. Kill the invisible leaks. When people imagine financial difficulty, they often picture large, obvious events: a major loss, a failed investment, an unexpected emergency. Yet in many lives, the greater threat is not dramatic at all. It is gradual, quiet, almost polite in the way it goes unnoticed. These are the invisible leaks, small, recurring outflows of money that appear harmless individually, yet over time erode the very margin that creates financial stability. Unlike major expenses, invisible leaks rarely trigger alarm. They slip into routine, disguised as convenience, comfort, or minor reward, a subscription renewed without reflection, a purchase made to ease a demanding day, a service retained out of habit rather than necessity, an upgrade accepted simply because it was offered. None of these decisions feel consequential in isolation, and that is precisely why they persist. Human attention is naturally drawn toward what is large and immediate. We monitor the obvious while overlooking the incremental, but financial life is cumulative. What repeats quietly often shapes the outcome more decisively than what occurs loudly. It is worth pausing occasionally to ask a gentle but revealing question: am I directing my money, or is it dispersing itself? Dispersal is rarely intentional. More often, it reflects the pace of modern living, where transactions are frictionless and spending can occur with barely a moment's awareness. Convenience, while valuable, carries a subtle cost. It reduces the pause that once allowed reflection. Financially disciplined individuals do not eliminate convenience, nor do they attempt to scrutinize every minor expense with exhausting precision. Instead, they cultivate periodic awareness. They step back, they review, they notice, and in noticing, they reclaim authorship. One of the most common sources of leakage is what might be called subscription drift. Services accumulate gradually. Entertainment platforms, digital tools, memberships, each modest on its own, yet collectively substantial. Often the greater issue is not the cost itself, but the unconsciousness surrounding it. Payments continue long after the original value has faded, simply because no moment was taken to reassess. Another frequent leak emerges through what psychologists sometimes describe as emotional spending, purchases made less from need than from the desire to shift how we feel. After an intense week, spending can resemble relief. During periods of fatigue, convenience can feel restorative. In moments of celebration, expansion can feel deserved. None of these impulses are inherently wrong. Money is meant to support life, not sterilize it. But without awareness, emotional spending can become habitual, a reflex rather than a choice. Disciplined builders learn a subtle skill, the pause between feeling and spending. Often, even a brief delay brings clarity. The question becomes less, "Do I want this?" and more, "Will this meaningfully improve my life or simply occupy it?" Another quiet drain on financial momentum is status leakage, spending-driven, sometimes unconsciously, by the desire to align with perceived social norms. When certain upgrades appear common, declining them can feel like stepping out of rhythm with one's environment. Yet what is normalized is not always what is stabilizing. Builders gradually grow comfortable, making decisions that prioritize structural strength over silent comparison, not rigidly, not defensively, simply with awareness that their future deserves participation in present choices. Perhaps the most empowering realization is this: you do not need to eliminate every leak. You need only address enough of them to redirect meaningful flow toward your future. Small reclaimed amounts, when consistently preserved, accumulate with surprising force. What once slipped away begins quietly reinforcing your foundation instead. There is also a psychological reward in this process. As leaks are reduced, you may notice a growing sense of control, not restrictive, but clarifying. Money begins to feel less scattered, more purposeful. And where purpose enters, confidence often follows. A helpful practice is to conduct occasional personal audits, calm reviews of where money has been traveling. Not with criticism, but with curiosity. What is serving my life? What has outlived its usefulness? What, if redirected, could strengthen my future? Curiosity invites adjustment without shame. Over time, these adjustments create something deeply reassuring: the sense that your financial life is no longer operating on autopilot. You are guiding it. And yet, even a well-guided structure can be placed under strain by one of the most misunderstood forces in modern finance, a force capable of accelerating progress when handled wisely or quietly restricting the future when approached without care: debt. Few financial tools carry as much emotional weight or cultural debate. Some avoid it entirely, others accept it without hesitation. But like many powerful instruments, its impact depends less on its existence and more on how it is used. Chapter 6. Debt, Tool or Trap. Few financial subjects provoke stronger reactions than debt. For some, it represents opportunity, a bridge toward experiences or assets that might otherwise remain inaccessible for years. For others, it carries the weight of caution, a reminder of obligations that extend far into the future. Both perspectives contain truth. Debt, by its nature, is neither inherently good nor inherently harmful. It is a financial instrument, and like any powerful instrument, its effect depends entirely on how it is handled. Used thoughtfully, debt can expand possibility. Used carelessly, it can quietly compress the future. The difficulty is that debt often feels manageable at the moment it is accepted. Payments appear reasonable, timelines seem distant. The present benefit is clear, while the long arc of obligation remains abstract. Human psychology is naturally present-oriented. We experience the reward now and promise that our future selves will carry the responsibility. But the future, when it arrives, is no longer abstract. It is lived. Every recurring payment becomes a claim on time not yet worked, income not yet earned, choices not yet made. This is why disciplined individuals approach debt with neither fear nor casualness, but with respect. Before accepting an obligation, they pause long enough to ask a clarifying question: will this debt expand my future or mortgage it? Constructive debt tends to support growth. It is often associated with assets, education, or opportunities that have a reasonable likelihood of strengthening one's long-term position. Consumptive debt, by contrast, typically finances experiences or items whose value fades while the obligation remains. The distinction is not always perfectly clean, but the guiding principle remains powerful. Debt should help your life grow larger, not tighter. Another important consideration is flexibility. Every fixed payment reduces the range of choices available in future months. One obligation may feel manageable. Several can begin to narrow financial maneuverability. This narrowing is not always immediately felt. Often, it becomes visible only when circumstances shift, when income changes, priorities evolve, or unexpected needs arise. Flexibility, once surrendered, is not easily reclaimed. For this reason, disciplined builders tend to protect it carefully. It is also wise to recognize the emotional dimension of debt. Beyond its numerical cost, it can subtly influence how a person moves through the world. Some carry it comfortably, others experience a persistent background awareness, a quiet sense of being tethered. Neither reaction is a flaw, but self-understanding matters. Financial decisions are most sustainable when aligned not only with logic, but with one's psychological temperament. There is no virtue in adopting obligations that disturb your peace simply because they appear acceptable on paper. Another helpful practice is to resist normalizing debt simply because it is common. Cultural familiarity can soften perceived risk. When many people carry similar obligations, they begin to feel like a standard feature of adulthood rather than a deliberate choice. Yet normal is not always synonymous with stabilizing. Builders remember that each commitment represents future effort already assigned, and future effort, once promised, has fewer places left to go. None of this suggests that a disciplined life must be entirely debt-free. Rather, it invites intentionality, the willingness to examine not only whether you can take on an obligation, but whether doing so supports the architecture you are constructing. Sometimes the most powerful financial decision is not the one that expands your present, but the one that preserves your future range of motion. There is also quiet wisdom in progressing at a pace your structure can comfortably support. Rapid expansion fueled by excessive obligation may look impressive for a time, but stability favors foundations that are allowed to strengthen gradually. And should you already carry debt, remember this: the past is informational, not condemning. Financial lives are rarely transformed through self-criticism. They change through clarity, planning, and steady forward movement. Each thoughtful payment reduces weight. Each intentional adjustment reclaims space. Progress, here as elsewhere, is cumulative. Perhaps the most grounding perspective is this: debt is easiest to carry when your life is not already stretched thin, which is why many disciplined individuals focus first on strengthening margin before accepting new obligations. Margin and restraint are quiet allies. Together, they protect the future from becoming overcrowded. Yet even as obligations are managed wisely, another truth begins to emerge, one that reassures many who worry they lack extraordinary financial talent. For wealth, contrary to popular imagination, is rarely the reward for brilliance. More often, it is the reward for consistency. Chapter 7. Consistency outperforms brilliance. There is a persistent myth surrounding financial success, the idea that it belongs primarily to the exceptionally gifted, the market prodigies, the perfectly timed investors, the individuals who seem to possess an almost instinctive understanding of money. These stories are compelling. They capture attention because they are dramatic, and drama is memorable. But what is memorable is not always representative. When we step back from the rare and observe the many, a quieter pattern emerges. Most enduring wealth is not built through flashes of brilliance. It is built through consistency. Consistency rarely draws headlines. It unfolds without spectacle, a steady rhythm of behaviors repeated long after the initial excitement has faded. A portion saved, an investment maintained, a lifestyle held within supportive boundaries, a plan followed through changing seasons. None of these actions appear extraordinary in isolation. Yet over years, they begin to interact with one another, and with time, in ways that produce remarkable strength. Brilliance often seeks optimization, the perfect entry, the ideal strategy, the highest return. Consistency seeks continuation. And in financial life, continuation is extraordinarily powerful. This is because wealth responds generously to what is sustained. Small amounts, given enough time and uninterrupted space, possess a capacity to grow that can seem almost disproportionate to their humble beginnings. Many people underestimate this precisely because the early stages are so quiet. Progress appears modest. Momentum feels slow. It can be tempting to wonder whether more aggressive action is required. But builders understand something essential. You do not need financial genius. You need financial endurance. Endurance means remaining aligned when novelty fades, when markets fluctuate, when others appear to accelerate, when the path feels uneventful. In fact, one of the great advantages of consistency is that it reduces the number of decisions you must repeatedly negotiate. When behaviors become habitual, they no longer demand constant emotional energy. Saving is no longer debated each month. Investing is no longer postponed until conditions feel perfect. Structure carries you forward even when motivation ebbs. There is also a quiet protection embedded within consistency. Brilliant but sporadic decisions can create peaks, but without continuation, peaks are difficult to maintain. Consistency, by contrast, builds plateaus, stable ground, a life less vulnerable to dramatic swings. Another misconception worth releasing is that consistency must be rigid to be effective. Financial lives, like human lives, benefit from flexibility. Adjustments will be necessary. Strategies will evolve. Learning never fully concludes. Consistency does not mean refusing to adapt. It means remaining broadly aligned while you adapt. Perhaps the most comforting aspect of this principle is its accessibility. You do not need ideal conditions to begin behaving consistently. You need only a willingness to repeat supportive actions, even when they feel small, even when their impact is not yet visible. Over time, visibility arrives, and when it does, it often appears less like a sudden breakthrough, and more like a quiet realization. What once required effort now feels natural. This is the transformation consistency offers. Discipline becomes identity. Structure becomes normal. Financial calm begins to replace financial tension. It is also important to acknowledge that consistency asks for patience, particularly during periods when dramatic stories circulate around you. Tales of rapid gains can stir restlessness, inviting the question of whether steadiness is too modest an approach. Yet many such stories omit the volatility that accompanied them. What rises quickly often moves unpredictably. Builders, oriented toward durability, tend to prefer paths they can remain on comfortably for many years, because ultimately, the strategy you can sustain is far more valuable than the one that dazzles briefly but proves impossible to maintain. There is a profound confidence that grows from knowing you are not dependent on perfect decisions. Your progress is not riding on a single moment of insight. It is being constructed daily, quietly, reliably, and this reliability produces something many people seek but struggle to name: trust in the future. Yet even the most consistent structure benefits from thoughtful expansion. For while discipline protects what you have, income growth often determines how quickly your architecture can strengthen. But expansion must be approached with care. When income rises without corresponding awareness, life can become busier, more expensive, yet no more secure. The goal is not merely to earn more. It is to ensure that increased earning actually improves the quality and stability of your life. Chapter 8. Increase income intelligently. At some stage in every disciplined financial life, a quiet realization begins to surface. Structure stabilizes what you have, but income influences how quickly that structure can grow. There is only so much optimization possible within a fixed inflow. Thoughtful spending, reduced leakage, and strong habits create protection, but expansion often requires an increase in earning power. And yet few financial pursuits are as misunderstood as the pursuit of more income. Modern culture often frames earning in extreme terms, glorifying exhaustion, celebrating constant hustle, quietly suggesting that rest is evidence of insufficient ambition. But a larger income that costs you your health, your clarity, or your relationships is rarely an upgrade. It is a trade made without full accounting. Financially mature individuals approach income growth differently. They do not chase every opportunity simply because it promises more. Instead, they evaluate earning through a wider lens, one that considers sustainability alongside reward. A helpful question sometimes guides their thinking. Will this additional income strengthen my life, or slowly consume it? This question invites discernment, for not all income is equal. Some forms expand your capacity while preserving your energy. Others demand such continuous output that little remains for the life the money was meant to support. The goal, therefore, is not merely to earn more, but to earn more intelligently. One of the most reliable paths toward intelligent income growth is skill expansion. Skills, unlike many external opportunities, travel with you. They compound quietly, increasing your adaptability across changing economic landscapes. Rather than scattering effort across countless pursuits, disciplined builders often focus on deepening capabilities that the world continues to value: communication, problem-solving, technical competence, leadership, specialized knowledge. Over time, these abilities position them for advancement not through urgency, but through preparedness. Another powerful concept is what might be called skill stacking, the thoughtful combination of complementary abilities that together create uncommon value. Individually, each skill may be ordinary. Together, they become distinctive. Distinctiveness often attracts opportunity. Opportunity, when aligned with discipline, accelerates financial stability. It is also wise to remain attentive to the difference between temporary spikes and durable earning. Some opportunities offer quick financial lifts but lack continuity. Others grow slowly yet persist, providing reliable inflow across years. Builders tend to respect durability. Predictable income supports predictable planning, and predictability is one of the quiet architects of calm. Of course, ambition has its place. Growth often asks us to stretch beyond familiarity, to accept challenges that develop our capacity. But stretching and straining are not the same. Stretching expands you, straining depletes you. If your pursuit of income leaves you perpetually exhausted, disconnected from those you value, or unable to engage meaningfully with your own life, it may be worth pausing to reassess the structure of that pursuit, for money is meant to support living, not postpone it indefinitely. Another subtle danger accompanying rising income is lifestyle inflation, which we explored earlier. Without intentional behavior, higher earnings can be absorbed almost invisibly into higher commitments, leaving stability unchanged despite increased effort. This is why behavioral growth must accompany income growth. Otherwise, you may find yourself running faster, yet standing on the same financial ground. A stabilizing principle worth remembering is this: income changes your life only when your behavior grows with it. Each increase offers a choice: expand immediately or strengthen first. Those who strengthen first often discover that future expansions feel far more comfortable when supported by an already solid base. There is also wisdom in diversifying income thoughtfully when possible. Multiple streams, even modest ones, can reduce dependence on any single source, softening the impact of unexpected change. But diversification should not become fragmentation. Too many pursuits can dilute focus, leaving each underdeveloped. As with most things, balance matters. Perhaps the most reassuring realization is that income growth is not a race against others. It is a gradual unfolding shaped by learning, positioning, and readiness. You do not need to capture every opportunity. You need only remain open to the ones aligned with the life you are constructing. And remember, earning more is not the final objective. It is a means, a resource that allows you to build margin more quickly, invest more steadily, protect more thoroughly, and live with greater autonomy. Yet as your structure strengthens and your earning expands, another responsibility quietly emerges, one that too many overlook until experience teaches it unmistakably. It is not enough to build. You must also protect what you build. For without protection, even strong structures can be unexpectedly shaken. Chapter 9. Protect what you build. There is a quiet shift that occurs as financial life strengthens. In the early stages, attention is naturally directed toward earning, stabilizing, creating momentum. But once something meaningful has been built, however modest it may seem, a new responsibility emerges: protection. For wealth is not defined solely by what is accumulated. It is defined by what endures, and endurance rarely happens by accident. Many financial disruptions are not the result of poor earning or careless spending, but of insufficient preparation for life's unpredictability. The unexpected is not a question of if, only when. A sudden medical need, an urgent journey, a professional transition, an unforeseen repair. Events such as these arrive without consulting our plans. When they do, protection determines whether they remain manageable interruptions or escalate into lasting setbacks. One of the most foundational forms of protection is the emergency reserve. At its core, an emergency reserve is not merely money set aside, it is stored stability, a quiet declaration that your life will not be easily destabilized by the unforeseen. Without such a reserve, even capable individuals may be forced into reactive decisions, liquidating long-term investments prematurely, accepting unfavorable debt, or compromising future plans simply to restore immediate balance. With a reserve, the emotional landscape changes. Urgency softens into response. You gain the priceless ability to think clearly, precisely when clarity is most needed. It is helpful to view this reserve not as idle money, but as structural reinforcement, much like the unseen elements that allow a well-designed building to withstand sudden pressure. Another dimension of protection involves risk awareness, not risk avoidance, for growth often requires measured exposure, but risk understanding. Disciplined builders develop the habit of asking quiet protective questions. What could disrupt this? Am I overly dependent on a single source? Have I mistaken favorable conditions for permanent ones? These questions are not pessimistic. They are stabilizing. They allow you to prepare calmly, rather than scramble later. Insurance, too, belongs within this conversation, not as a product to be accumulated indiscriminately, but as a tool for transferring risks that would otherwise be too heavy to carry alone. The purpose of insurance is not to anticipate catastrophe at every turn. It is to ensure that if difficulty arrives, it does not dismantle what took years to construct. There is wisdom in protecting against events large enough to alter the trajectory of your life, while allowing smaller inconveniences to be absorbed by your margin. Protection is ultimately about proportionality. It is also worth recognizing the growing importance of digital awareness in modern financial life. As money increasingly moves through electronic pathways, vigilance becomes part of responsible stewardship. Simple practices, safeguarding access, reviewing accounts periodically, remaining cautious with unfamiliar requests, can prevent disruptions that are far easier to avoid than to repair. None of this requires constant suspicion, only attentive calm. Perhaps one of the most overlooked forms of protection is the refusal to overextend during favorable seasons. When conditions are smooth, it is tempting to assume they will remain so. Commitments expand, risk tolerance rises, caution softens. Yet disciplined individuals remember that resilience is built before it is needed. They prepare in calm weather, so that storms, when they inevitably pass through, find them already anchored. Another subtle but powerful protective habit is documentation, ensuring that important financial information is organized and accessible. Should others ever need to step in unexpectedly, clarity becomes an act of care extended beyond yourself. Protection, in this sense, is not only personal, it is relational. It safeguards those connected to your life. It is important, however, not to confuse protection with fearfulness. The aim is not to move through the world anticipating disruption at every corner, but to cultivate a structure resilient enough that you do not have to. Preparedness invites ease. You sleep differently when you know your foundations are reinforced. You decide differently when you know a single event cannot easily undo years of effort. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to experience a quiet confidence. Not the confidence of invulnerability, but of readiness. Over time, protection transforms wealth from something fragile into something durable. Yet, as durability grows, another perspective naturally follows, one that may be among the most transformative in all of financial life. It is the ability to widen your timeline, to step back from the immediacy of months and quarters, and begin thinking in decades. For when your timeline stretches, decisions clarify. Chapter 10. Think in decades, not months. Modern life trains us to think in short intervals, monthly bills, quarterly targets, annual reviews. Even our language reflects compression. We ask where we will be next year far more often than where we hope to stand 10 or 20 years from now. This short-horizon thinking is not a personal failing. It is reinforced by the tempo of the world around us, a world that rewards immediacy, celebrates rapid results, and rarely pauses long enough to honor slow construction. Yet wealth has always operated on a different clock. It responds generously to time, but only when time is allowed to participate. When you begin thinking in decades rather than months, something subtle but profound happens. Many decisions that once felt complicated become surprisingly clear. Short-term thinking tends to magnify the emotional weight of the present. A market fluctuation feels urgent. A temporary setback appears larger than it is. The desire for immediate comfort can overshadow the quiet advantages of patience. But when viewed across a decade, most financial movements reveal their true scale. What seems dramatic today often becomes a small contour in a much longer landscape. This expanded perspective reduces reactivity. You are less tempted to abandon sound strategies simply because they are not producing instant visibility. Instead, you allow time to perform its patient work. One of the great psychological benefits of long-horizon thinking is emotional steadiness. Urgency softens. Decision-making slows just enough to become more thoughtful. You begin to recognize that not every season must be optimized. Some are meant simply to continue. Builders often adopt a guiding question. If I repeat this behavior for the next 10 years, where will it lead? Notice the quiet power of repetition embedded in that question. Financial lives are rarely defined by isolated choices. They are shaped by patterns. A modest habit sustained across decades can outperform intense effort that fades after a few years. Consistency, when paired with time, becomes formidable. There is also a liberating humility in thinking long-term. You accept that progress need not be dramatic to be meaningful. Invisible growth remains growth. Foundations strengthen whether or not they attract attention. This frees you from the exhausting need to measure your life against the visible tempo of others. Comparison loses some of its urgency when you realize that timelines differ, and that durable structures often take longer to become apparent. Another advantage of decade-oriented thinking is resilience during uncertainty. Economic cycles shift. Industries evolve, personal circumstances change. When your horizon is wide, these fluctuations feel less like derailments and more like passages within a longer journey. You adapt without abandoning direction. Patience, in this context, stops feeling like waiting. It begins to feel like quiet participation in a process larger than any single moment. Of course, thinking in decades does not mean neglecting the present. Life is lived day by day, and each day deserves attention. Rather, it means allowing the future a voice in today's decisions, ensuring that immediate comfort does not unintentionally silence long-term stability. It is also worth remembering that time amplifies behavior regardless of its direction. Supportive habits compound in your favor. Neglected ones accumulate quietly until their weight becomes difficult to ignore. Time is impartial, but when paired with discipline, it becomes one of the most powerful allies you will ever have. Perhaps the most reassuring realization is this: you do not need perfect foresight to benefit from long-term thinking. You need only orientation, a willingness to keep your life pointed toward a horizon broad enough to accommodate both your ambitions and your uncertainties. Over years, this orientation produces something deeply calming, the sense that your future is not being left to chance. It is being constructed, gradually, deliberately, and often more successfully than you realize, while you are still within the early chapters of that construction. As this perspective settles into your thinking, one final insight begins to emerge, an insight that gathers everything we have explored into a single steady posture. For discipline, at its highest expression, is not about rigid control. It is about designing a life that grows increasingly supportive, increasingly resilient, increasingly free. Let us bring these ideas together now and step into the quiet posture of those who no longer drift financially, but build the calm power of the disciplined life. There is a noticeable difference between a life that is financially reactive and one that is financially designed. Reactive lives are often shaped by immediacy. Money arrives and is quickly assigned. Decisions are made under subtle pressure. Unexpected events feel disproportionately disruptive. Even progress, when it occurs, can feel fragile, dependent on conditions remaining favorable. But the disciplined life moves differently. Not hurried, not rigid, simply directed. Throughout this journey, we have explored the architecture that supports such a life, the structure created by paying yourself first, the clarity gained from separating present needs from future reserves, the protection offered by margin, the quiet strength of consistency, the wisdom of intelligent earning, and the foresight required to protect what you build. None of these principles demand perfection. They ask only for participation, for willingness, for the quiet courage to behave today in ways your future self will one day recognize with gratitude. It is important to understand that discipline is not something you arrive at once and carry effortlessly forever. Like all meaningful capacities, it is sustained through attention, gentle, ongoing, forgiving attention. There will be moments when you drift, moments when convenience persuades you, moments when fatigue invites the easier choice. This is not failure, it is humanity. What matters is the return. Each time you realign, without harsh self-judgment, you strengthen something deeper than any single financial decision: self-trust. And self-trust is profoundly stabilizing, because when you trust your own behavior, the future stops feeling like a gamble. It begins to feel like a direction. Another quiet transformation occurs as discipline takes root, one many people never anticipate. Your relationship with money becomes calmer. You think about it less obsessively, because you worry about it less frequently. Decisions that once produced tension become almost routine. Obligations no longer feel like threats. Planning shifts from something intimidating to something reassuring. This calm is not accidental. It is constructed, often slowly, often invisibly, but unmistakably. There is also a form of dignity embedded within disciplined living. It is the dignity of knowing that your life is supported not only by effort but by intention, that you are not leaving your future entirely exposed to circumstance, that you are, in quiet ways, preparing the ground beneath your own feet. And perhaps the most beautiful aspect of financial discipline is this: it expands your ability to choose. Choice over how you spend your time, choice over which opportunities you accept, choice over how you respond when life inevitably surprises you. Freedom is rarely loud. More often, it feels like space. Space to think, space to adjust, space to live without the constant compression of financial urgency. It is worth remembering that no one builds this space overnight. Do not measure your progress against dramatic timelines. Measure it instead by direction. Are your decisions becoming more intentional? Is your structure growing sturdier? Are you creating even small amounts of room where none existed before? If the answer is yes, then you are already participating in the disciplined life. Be patient with the pace. Strong structures favor careful construction. Years from now, you may look back and struggle to identify the precise moment when everything began to feel more stable. There will likely be no single turning point, only the accumulated result of many thoughtful choices. That is how durable change often appears: quietly, gradually, lastingly. So wherever you stand today, whether you are reorganizing, rebuilding, or simply refining, allow this to be the moment you release the belief that financial calm belongs only to a fortunate few. It belongs to those who build it. And from this point forward, you need not think of discipline as restriction. You may think of it as what it truly is: a form of self-respect expressed through action, a structure that protects your effort, a path that steadily widens your future. Move forward deliberately. Protect your margin. Let consistency carry you when motivation fades. And trust that each disciplined decision, however small it may appear today, is quietly shaping a life that will one day feel remarkably supported. Not perfect, but prepared. Not extravagant, but resilient. Not rushed, but strong. This is the calm power of the disciplined life. And it is available to anyone willing to build it, one thoughtful decision at a time. Thank you for spending this time with Audiobook Lib. If these ideas brought you clarity, subscribe and return whenever you are ready to build your finances, your mindset, and your future with intention.